It says we are live, so I'm going to take its word for it. Welcome to the
Right?
Founder's Mind.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
For those who have not been to a live stream, the Founder's Mind is a podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and then all the other places you listen. And today we have Dawn Myers, who has graciously given us her time and decided to be on the show. Thank you, Dawn.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
Uh, I don't even remember where we met at this point,
We
but
met through one of my favorites, Genevieve Gralton from
yes,
Under Bears. Yep.
yes, excellent. I I find that I've talked to so many people, and I try and keep track of where the relationship starts, but then I forget. So I appreciate that. Genevieve is in fact an incredible human, and she did
Yes,
make this connection.
she did.
And since then, we have had lunch when it was appropriate to be in person with people. We've had phone calls, meetings, and now you're in a whole new space with Vanetta. Um,
Yeah.
but I would love to hear in your words because they're always better than mine. What are you up to? What are you working on? What's going on in your world?
Yeah, I mean, the two big things, of course, is my company, the most. We make hair tools that are tailored for the needs of women of color, and we can get into that. And then, I also run the DC chapter of the Vinette Project, which is a 501(c)(3) that's dedicated to funding and giving resources to women founders from, scalable high tech companies. So it's been quite a last couple of months, capped off by this past week, especially the
Oh yeah.
weekend. My company definitely had to make some sharp pivots given COVID and everything that we were seeing. Vinetta, which is an ecosystem organization that serves both startups that are struggling and trying to figure out their way in this new environment, as well as investors who are also trying to figure out their way. It's been a very intense last couple of months, but there have been lots of lessons learned that I'm excited to share with your audience.
Yeah, thank you. And you're doing a lot. And when we started, you were already. It felt to me that you were already doing so much with the most. And then I think in February, you shared that you were starting to do some work with the Vinetta Project, and I know the organization. I've done some work with them, and I
Mhm.
was just like, oh my gosh, how does one do all of the things that you're doing? And I'd like to know, how are you
Yeah,
moving these things forward?
great question. I mean, the simple answer is, I mean, there's no easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of time, and I have to be really strict about how I organize my days. I have to be really disciplined. There are lots of weekends, but the fact of the matter is, and I think that you can identify with this, when you're really truly dedicated to seeing equity in this space and moving the ball forward for underrepresented founders in particular in
Mm-hmm.
my case, that's what keeps me going,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's something about this space, right? When I found it a couple of years ago, I fell really hard immediately. And so when I fall for something, I'm in it 100%. And this is my life. Like I am very confident that this is what I'm here for. And so it's not difficult for me to say, okay, this is what we're doing with our days. And yeah, it's just been a really deep commitment. And then some of it has been just managing my time really well, right? Making sure that I'm delegating in a way that's reasonable and kind of managing all these projects in a really methodical way.
Yeah, no, I think being passionate and being committed is something that we've talked about, and it's something that you see. I mean, being able to sort of live in two worlds, one your business and one community builder.
Yeah.
Um, what was the this interests me, and sometimes I get to this question, and sometimes I don't. But you're building, you started building a hardware. It's a hardware company. It's a piece of hardware.
Correct.
And what was sort of the pull or motivation to get into something that is not easy?
Mm, yeah.
Not that any
Yeah.
business is inherently easy, but like get to
Sure.
like another level of complicated.
That's right. It is. It is. But at the end of the day, hardware is really hard, but I'm a big advocate for hardware in that for those who are willing to go the distance, this takes time. This is not going to be, nice smooth curve, right? There are going to be stops and starts. It's going to be what we do is a little bit more. It's a little trickier. There are other layers of complexity, but the other side of that is just so much clear space, so much opportunity, because there are so few people who are willing to knock down those doors. I mean, there's so few people who are willing to really kind of stick it out with any other business, right? And so finding those people who are willing to go even that much further, for those people who make it, there's a lot of opportunity there. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is, this is where the need was. So just to back up a little bit and talk about what my company does, we make hair tools that make it easier for women and women of color in particular to style their highly textured hair. So as you can see, my hair is up in a bun, and my hair is up in a bun because this stuff takes 2 or 3 hours to do. And between the op-eds and the meetings and the this and that, there was just no time for me to get gussied up for you. Unfortunately, Adam, I apologize.
No,
But
no problem.
this is the Black woman's kind of, this is our toil, right? Like, we've got a lot on us. We've got a lot going on in the background here, right? Socially, economically, health wise, we've got a lot going on in our careers. We've got to work that much harder. And then on top of that, on top of everything else, for those of us who are trying to embrace our natural aesthetic, our natural hair, that process takes a lot of time. It takes me about 2.5 hours. For a lot of other women, it takes, and it can take more depending on how persnickety I'm being, but it takes other women 4 hours, 5 hours. I've heard as much as 8 hours over the course of 2 days, just to do basic hairstyling, guys. I mean, think about it. Like, that's, an entire book that you could have read in that 8 hours, right? So it's wild. And so what I realized was that our hair isn't necessarily problematic, right? There were a couple things going on. You got some people who don't have the education. Wearing our natural hair is still relatively new. This is only a decade-old trend. And so there are a lot of people who are trying to figure out, what are the steps? How do I do my hair, right? So that's one part, is the confusion around it. And then the other part is the myriad of steps that go into this, right? And so what we did was we created a product that collapsed all of that and mechanized all of those steps into one easy, repeatable motion, right? So we developed a product that made it easy for women to detangle their hair and hydrate their hair and get the nourishment that they need, so that they can do things like get that workout in and maybe get an extra couple of hours of sleep, while also making it easy and approachable for folks who are still trying to figure out, all right, how do I do this? So that's kind of the thought behind it. And honestly, it wasn't, part of the reason that I got into hardware was because I didn't know enough not to get into hardware earlier on. But the fact of the matter is, this is the solution that a lot of people are looking for. And so we're just really committed to, making the products that the kind of mainstream, the market, really just doesn't understand. And if people don't understand this problem that we're going through, they can't make the solutions for the problem. Yeah. So we made them.
I mean, that makes sense. I think a lot of products come out of people not seeing the option out there, or the options that are out there are not really responding to the challenge or whatever the need is.
That's right.
And you said something that I've heard before from founders: if I knew everything I knew now, I might not have started. That there's a reconnecting. So if you can watch the stream, it sounds like we're reconnecting with Dawn. We'll see what we get in just a moment. I'll give her a minute to come back.
Okay, there you are.
Perfect. I got a nice little Skype pulse sound. Doot, doot. But what I was saying, I was just agreeing and regurgitating your words around, if you knew everything you knew now, you might not have hopped in or started. And I think that's an interesting point. There's a level of I don't like the word ignorance, but there's a level of not knowing, like you said, that allows you to enter into a space and imagine the possibilities.
That's right.
And say, when people say, well, no, it's too complicated, or no, you're like, well, no, like, let's give it a try. Let's push here. Let's push this boundary
That's right.
and see what we can get.
Yeah, yeah.
So how long has the most been in action? When did this start coming up? Besides, like, you possibly being dissatisfied with the products on the market for your entire life, like,
Right.
when was it like, I'm going to start to do something?
2 years ago.
Okay.
So, actually, I guess closer to 2.5 years now. So, February 2018 is when I just actually said, I filed the LLC paperwork and actually said, I'm going to do this, and started, liquidating my real estate and putting everything behind this. So yeah, that's when we started. And that first whole year, I mean, it's hardware, right? It's a different trajectory. That first whole year was just about education for me.
Yeah.
That entire first year was just about, all right, what's an industrial designer, and where do I find an engineer to work for me? And it was getting on a train from DC to New York and finding random people who I had, warm, relationships with, or I could get a warm intro to at L'Oreal or whatever beauty company, so that I could understand more about the industry and more about things like shelf space and more about things like, what a consumer is really going to need to grasp onto a new concept, and what investors are really going to need to grasp on, and what's going to work well for investors and consumers and retailers, and how do you marry all those pieces together. And so at that point, I put together a very rudimentary prototype. I mean, super Frankenstein. I literally went to the CVS. I bought a bunch of different brushes. I went to the Ace Hardware, and I went home with my new soldering iron and just started welding stuff together.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. It was so much fun, though. And then from there, I took it to I had found an engineer team in Taiwan, and I took it to them, and they were like, all right, we got to clean this up. And we just started iterating from there. I mean, it took us 4 prototypes to get to MVP, but that's how we did it.
Do you have pictures of the initial?
I do.
The soldering iron and the
Yeah.
all that stuff. Okay.
I do. So I do have pictures of the Frankenstein. I actually have the Frankenstein prototype around here somewhere.
Okay.
I'll have to dig it out for you and show you all the gooey sides. But yeah, I do have it.
Maybe in a little written post, I'll get some of that to share with us if you're interested or open.
Yeah.
But I think that's, some founders, and there's no right or wrong approach here. Some founders go elbow deep in the process, like what you just described, right? Like taking apart something, rebuilding things. And I had an interview with a founder of a company called QB. His name is Arnav, and they have this like pedal workout system that you can use at home on the couch. And the initial stories, the exercise bikes that they brought home, the rowing machines, the ellipticals, like everything home, and just started taking them apart.
Yeah.
And saying, what is under here? What is this thing? And how do we build what we are envisioning? That is so cool. Did you learn anything?
Did I learn anything? I am a completely different person than I was 2 years ago.
Okay.
I mean, the way I think, as you know, or I don't know, engineers think in a very different way than lawyers, right? I was a lawyer in a different life, right? And so the way that I was trained to think is just very different from how engineers think. I've had to change the way that I think, even just to kind of operate in the space. I've had to learn things like, I wouldn't dare try to build a product from scratch in CAD, but I've had to learn how to do, computer assisted design and be able to make those small tweaks so I don't have to pay somebody $200 or $300 just to spend a couple hours on it. My language is completely different. I'm completely immersed in this space, and it's a completely new world. And a lot of what comes with that, of course, is your circle. My circle is totally different. My friendships are totally different. And it's a completely different life than 2 years ago.
Sure. I mean, a lot happens in 2 years naturally, let alone if you embark on starting a business, starting
Hmm.
a business in a whole new space,
Yeah.
you know? Different than, say, starting a business in like if like for me, if I did consulting and then I started another consulting business, I'd have a lot of the same friends and
Sure.
same circle. Um, what, so it started 2 years ago. What's the journey and process like? I think hardware is really interesting because there's not as many examples. I mean, a lot of people are doing SaaS, a lot of people are doing apps.
Hmm.
But what's the journey been? Do you have a product out there, almost out there?
Yeah. Yeah, so we did a million prototypes and a million different iterations between each round of prototyping. And now, we finally got to MVP. So we finally got to that kind of functional product that we could actually test, that we could actually film, that we could actually put out there, which was really exciting. But that jump from prototyping to commercializing your product is a big jump.
Mm.
And so we've been bringing on investors, and we're trying to close a small amount of money. But during COVID, obviously, for those of you who are watching in the future, we're right smack dab in the middle of COVID, and closing that last little bit has been tricky. But we've gotten buy-in from some amazing, amazing people. I wasn't late to this call, but I was hoping to sign in like 10 minutes
Yeah, yeah.
earlier. And, one of the people who called me randomly out of the blue was this man who used to head up Clairol. And he was like, "Hey, I heard about your product through the grapevine and, want to support it." What? So we're getting all this incredible, incredible support from folks that I'm really super appreciative of. And fingers crossed we can close that last bit and really get our products commercializing on the market. The goal is it's June 1st right now.
Mm.
We're hoping to be we have a big demo day in October, and we're hoping to be manufacturing ready by then.
Wow.
So that's the goal. Yeah, it's really exciting stuff.
So do you have a version that you're using or have been able to use or not yet?
Yeah, so my current version is with our engineers. So unfortunately, thus the bun. I don't get to avail myself of the product that we spent all this time developing. And so right now our products are 3D printed prototypes,
Wow.
and 3D printed prototypes are the per unit cost is much higher, but you don't have to pay for all of the prep stuff. So you don't have to
Right.
pay for the tooling and the injection molding,
Yeah.
and the materials are cheaper.
There's no
And so
volume requirement.
exactly. So each of those prototypes runs us like $2,000 to $3,000 just to print and get assembled, right?
The
And
the
so,
print the print the print one, the 3D printed one?
yep,
Wow.
yeah.
That is no
So
joke.
it's no joke at all. And so they're very precious. And quite frankly, even if we didn't have them, being worked on right now, we wouldn't. It's not the kind of thing that we want to use every day, right? We
Yeah.
need to preserve it for special occasions.
Wild.
Yeah.
So in hardware, what would you say is one of the biggest lessons so far?
In hardware, I mean, the whole thing has just been one big lesson. I think one of the most difficult to parse areas is that marrying of your intellectual property with your design. So, the intellectual property goal, right? Like what you're trying to do is get the broadest possible construction while having it be narrow enough that you can actually pass muster with the PTO.
Yeah.
And so that becomes difficult because you are proposing all of these different product universes to the PTO.
Right.
And the question then becomes, okay, for a long time, and we're still going through the patent process, right? So for a long time, you won't even know exactly where those parameters are going to be. You're not even going to know like how broad or how wide you'll be able to like all of the design iterations that you'll actually be covered for. And so just kind of marrying kind of the prospectus, getting an idea of, taking those in-person meetings with your examiner, getting a sense of where those parameters are going to be, and then just trying to work within what you think those parameters are going to end up being, super tricky. So that's definitely been a complicated dance, nice little tango that we've learned to dance with the PTO. That's really been elucidating. So I think that's one big piece of the puzzle. The other big piece of the puzzle has really not been about hardware at all. I mean, one of my mentors, Callie Keene, you should check him out if you're interested out there in hardware. He's on LinkedIn, he's on Instagram, he might be on YouTube. I think he's on YouTube, and he just really gets hardware. He's been in the hardware space for 3 decades, and one of the things that he's kind of inculcated into us, and it took a long time for us to understand this, but he likes to say that a hardware product is, a strategy in time for your company. It's not your company. It's just the thing that you are using to serve your customers, your audience right now. What you're really doing is you're speaking to that customer in a way that they can really resonate with you, in a way that they trust you, so that when you propose, hey guys, can you buy this tool that I'm making for $200? They're already there with you and they're ready to go. They're ready to kind of connect with you. So that's been the biggest issue for me. How do I kind of use this voice? How do I use this experience to speak to my niche, to my beachhead? So that's definitely been, I think, the biggest lesson. Hardware companies really aren't about hardware at all. The big ones, the ones that do really well, they're speaking to a consumer's needs, wants, fears, and the life that they want to create for themselves.
No small task.
No small task at all. Small task
And
at all.
you didn't know all of this when you started?
No, I didn't know any of this stuff.
So I found it particularly interesting. One of the first challenges that you referenced was the patent and sort of the USPTO. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a law degree.
I do.
And so even with that is still one of like the most sort of intense processes with this.
Super intense.
Yeah.
It's really complicated. And I was a little haughty when I first started this. I was like, I'm a lawyer, whatever. I can draft my own patent. No, ma'am, you cannot. So I'm really glad that some folks reeled me in, and I ended up being connected with some amazing engineers who were also patent agents who were able to walk me through that process. But yeah, that's not something that I would advise anyone walking through alone.
That's great. And I mean, I think that there's one, as a trained lawyer, saying that it's important to hire people that are specifically trained, and not only that, spend their time doing this all the time. That's like what they want to do.
Yes.
And in addition, and I think this lesson hopefully comes up throughout the founder and entrepreneurial journey, that there's a transition from what you can do and want to do and feel like you should do to what you need to do, right? So you do have a law background, but the legal elements may not be your forte in this context.
That's right.
So some humility there over time.
Yeah, that's right. And that doesn't mean that, your legal background may not come into play, right? I haven't paid anybody to, write a contract or look at it over an NDA or any of that stuff. A lot of that stuff you might be able to handle, but patents, that's one area where I would say, bite the bullet.
You don't want to mess it up.
Hire someone. Yeah.
100%. There was an article in Harvard Business a while ago. There's a lot of articles. But they did run I don't remember exactly how they did the survey or how they did the research, but companies that are run by lawyers or former lawyers versus companies that are run by MBAs, according to this article, and I can find it and drop it in the notes, companies run by lawyers outperform companies run by MBAs.
Okay.
Because there's one of the things you just mentioned, there are legal needs for businesses that people who are lawyers have a slightly better grasp on, but also lawyers on average tend to be a little bit more, their risk mitigation is a little bit more effective.
Yeah.
And while they might be excited about growth curves, don't let the growth curve run their decision-making process.
That's exactly right.
which
That's exactly right.
prevents the company from running away with someone.
Yeah, here's the thing. Lawyers don't start companies. Lawyers are super risk averse. The kinds of people who start companies who are like me are entrepreneurs who happen to have gone to law school.
Mm.
But I will tell you, I've got some of the smartest people around, like just genius people with these incredible legal minds. But there's a switch that you have to flip to be able to go from that space to this. And when you find somebody who has that legal training and has that legal background, but also is willing to take that risk and has that gumption and that ability to jump in, that's a really special combination. So that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it resonated with a comment that someone made. I was talking to a gentleman named Rushal who lives and works in DC, and he also has a law degree but is not a practicing lawyer. And we were talking about that, and he shared a mentor of his before he went to law school said, if you get an MBA, you can run a business, but you can't practice law.
Yeah.
If you get a law degree, you can run a business and you could practice law. And I'm not dogging MBAs. It's an important degree. People do incredible things coming out of MBA programs. They have an incredible set of skills. But it was just a level of awareness and a certain set of distinctions that I had never considered. And this is all coming from someone who has one degree and took their time, approximately 8 years to get it. It's not a fancy one. It has a BS at the end of it. But it was just an interesting thought process I had never considered.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I think it's an important point to make, right? Because lawyers are just like everybody else. A lot of people are afraid to make this jump, right? And so if you are one of those lawyers who is an entrepreneur who happens to just have a legal background, I think it's important to hear people say, you don't have to have a particular set of credentials to do this work well. You can do it if you're a lawyer. You can do it if you're not a lawyer. You can do it if you're a nurse. You can do it if you're a janitor. I think at the end of the day, having worked somewhere and having had the opportunity to hone that business judgment and getting that managerial experience and understanding how to run teams efficiently, that is really the key. Lawyers happen to have that, but there are tons of other people from other professionals, from other professions who happen to have it as well.
For sure. No, I think that there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I think that that's a great perspective. So you're on a high-speed train to production and getting this out into the world. 2 years in development, which, by the way, is not the longest development. I mean, like some companies go years and years and years before a product hits the shelf.
Keurig, our North Star, took 18 years to get to market. 18 years.
There you go. 18 years. So an entire childhood.
Yeah.
I was trying to think. And starting this year, you started doing work with the Vinette Project.
That's right.
Do you want to take a little time? Can we talk a little bit about that? I mean, like, you're working with this community, one that's, I would say, pretty strong and present in DC, and they've got chapters around the country. What has that done? What pulled you in there?
Yeah, Vinette, so let's back up a little bit. When I found this space, you got to understand, I had been looking for my thing for a good, I don't know, a decade. I had been, from the time that I graduated from college, I thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. So I applied to law school. A semester into law school, I hated it. And then I was just like on this course looking for it. And I started out, I was on the Hill during law school, and then went into campaigns, and then went into big law. There was a stint, early in my career where I was in wealth management at UBS. While I was at the firm, I developed some real estate on the side. So I was always really looking for my thing. And I was exhausted from looking for my thing. And it took some time. I eventually kind of left my firm, and I took some time to really think, just pause, right? I had been on this roller coaster to find this thing, and I took some time to find the common thread. What led me from wealth management to campaigns to the hill to walk. Like, what is all that? And what I found was every single thing I did was about advocacy on some level. Whether it was working in a congressman's office and, trying to get some development block grants for communities in need, or whether it was, advocating for women of color lawyers in big law to give them a higher platform and to give them exposure so that they could make partner and kind of, make an impact there, or whether it was working on the campaign with Barry O in 2012, or real estate was all about, for me, it was all about going into these communities in DC that I grew up in, that I loved, and cleaning up these properties, making them beautiful spaces for people to live in. So it became really clear to me, okay, advocacy is your thing. What are you going to advocate for? And I don't know how I ended up in beauty, but I think there were just a lot of people around me at the time. I was putting out feelers. Guys, what do you think I should do? Mom, what do you think I should do? And everybody was just like, I mean, hair is your thing. It's always been your thing. It's a hot market. But like, why wouldn't you do that? And I couldn't see it. I didn't see myself as a beauty founder, or I didn't see that. But once I was able to marry the advocacy part with the hair and beauty part, it just kind of clicked. And once it clicked, I started looking I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea what a startup was, even. Like, literally did not know what the definition of a startup was. Couldn't have told you. And then, I walked into this grassroots organization, Startups Ignite, out in Northern Virginia. They welcomed me with open arms. First meeting, that's where I met my patent agent, who's still with me today. And these people just really, like, I don't know, I just felt this connection. Like, I found my people. And, that was just a really incredible feeling for me. And I know what it's like to literally have no idea what you're doing and to be looking for resources and have nowhere to go. And so that's part of it. And then as I got into the space, I started to see the trends, right, that we all see, and that folks are outside protesting about right now. Yeah. There are a lot of people who had the credentials and had the teams and had a great concept and had the traction and had the metrics and still couldn't get funded. And we all know in this world, without the funding, that fire, you need the oil to feed the fire. Yeah. And I started seeing those trends and seeing that nobody cared. We saw the stats. We saw that there was a problem, but nobody was actually really holding themselves accountable. And so from there, I started working with other organizations like Black Girl Ventures, which was focused on Black women entrepreneurs. And I did that for a little while and eventually made my way through the grapevine. You know how this space is.
And DC's tight.
And DC's tight, right? I met Vanessa, our founder, at an event. She was like, "You'd be great." And I was like, and sure enough, 3 or 4 months later, I was working for Vinette. So she reeled me in. And the timing was just really good because I was building out this incredible team for my company who could take over some of the, a lot of the weight off of my shoulders. And that freed me up to do some of this equity work, which quite frankly benefits my company. Sure. Being able to go out and build these relationships with VCs and with partner organizations in the ecosystem directly benefits my company. And so it all just kind of works together. And I honestly believe that the universe, when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it just conspires to work things out for you. And that's exactly what these past 6 months have been.
That's amazing. I mean, serious. I mean, like, I think there's some really interesting pieces there also, listening to you sort of be on this search and be interested in having that impact, finding your way into health and beauty, like you said, but then also be presented with the Vinette Project, which is, it's more directly focused on impact and getting funding towards women-led and founded companies.
Yeah.
And being able to serve both. I think that sometimes we get kind of singular focused, but we shouldn't forget that there are people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and probably hundreds of other people that I don't know their names of or heard of them, who are running multiple brands,
That's right.
businesses. Um,
That's right.
and we have,
And if I may, I think it's really important. There are a lot of people who are like, you shouldn't do that because investors aren't going to want to invest in you if they know that you're doing multiple things. But here's the reality. Um, I believe that a lot of black companies, a lot of us have to think outside of the box, right? That template that works for everybody else, that template doesn't work for us.
yeah,
Even when we follow all of the rules and we walk the straight and narrow, we're still not getting funded, right? So we gotta hustle, just like you're hustling your company. You gotta hustle your network, and
yeah,
you gotta hustle all of these ancillary pieces that make it come together. And Vinetta, Black Girl Ventures, that is, they're causes that are near and dear to me,
hmm,
but they're also the hustle that put me in a position where I can have a conversation with it. Like, there's a bunch of VCs who I can call right now and be like, hey, can you look this over for me really quickly before I walk into this conversation? That's invaluable.
yeah,
So, I think we have to learn two things. Black founders and underrepresented founders, we have to learn that that template that they put out there for you is a trap sometimes in some ways, because we're not going to get there doing it the way that your traditional Silicon Valley startup does it.
yeah,
Then on the other hand, it's about encouraging investors and VCs and people in the ecosystem to give us the grace, right? You can't tell black women we're not going to fund you, but then tell them that you shouldn't be doing anything else anywhere else. It's we have to do what we have to do to make it work. And the one thing that I'd like to tell your listeners and everybody who I talk to is, you're successful if you're in this space, if you're doing this work, you're smart and you're successful in some way.
yeah,
And you've gotten there by following your internal compass and by following your gut. And you're going to have to do a whole lot of that following while you're on this path. You can't expect for that path that's worked for everybody else to work for you.
yeah. There's so much in there that you just shared, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think that there are experiences that I can never speak to on a personal level because it's not my reality, and that's true for a lot of the world. And I think very, very sadly we're seeing that play out in other arenas.
Indeed.
But the rules on paper are the same, but the reality is different. And I think that's a lot of what you're saying here. And correct me if I'm wrong. And I had a conversation with Mac McKeever Conwell, one of the first episodes I did, and
Yeah.
he did a deep dive into raising friends and family rounds in communities of color and how it's just way different and harder and almost non-existent. And when you go to
Mm-hmm.
that first seed round, investors are like, well, why didn't your friends and family invest? And it's like, well, let me educate you on the challenges here. So
Right.
I'm not going to do the educating. You should listen to that episode or just reach out to people who are doing this work. And if they have the energy and patience to talk to you, um, you know, maybe they can educate. But I think that, what you're talking about is we need to change the way that we look at our expectations for founders and for people in general.
Yes.
And we need to allow the people that are having those challenges contextualize the way we need to look at it. So I can't look at you and say, let me contextualize your situation and figure it out and from my lens,
Mm-hmm.
but say, like Dawn or any of the other guests I've had or people that I talk to, tell me what works for you, for your world, for your situation, and how do we need to show up. And I think that's one of the big missing parts is listening and saying, how do we need to show up?
Yeah, yeah. A big part is listening and deferring a little bit. As I just described, I'm in the black hair space, and I've had so many. I go into these meetings, and I'll tell people the same stats that I told you. It takes me 2.5 years just to do basic styling, just to be able to just show myself in public, not even fancy.
Yeah.
And it's other women 8 hours over the course of 2 days, and they're like, "This is all. I don't believe you. Like, That's not real. And it's just crazy to me because it's such a huge part of the lives of a big part of the population, right? And it's not just Black women. It's Black women, it's Hispanic women, it's Jewish women, it's Arab women, it's a white woman who just happened to have really curly hair, right? We all experience this and it touches our lives in a visceral way. And it's not just, oh, it takes me a little bit longer. It means I can't work out because every time I work out, I got to wash my scalp. I have to wash that sweat off my scalp. And that's another 3 hours out of my schedule. So it makes it harder to work out. It makes it harder to travel. Traveling is a whole other pain point. It makes it harder to, for those of us who have kids, you've got other human beings whose hair life you are also responsible for. These are not small pain points. This seemingly superficial kind of beauty issue touches our life in a really visceral way, and it affects our health, it affects our sleep, and it's just defer to us, right? When we tell you that this is a problem that we need solved, don't tell me, I don't believe you, I think you need to go do some more research. I've been doing this research for the past 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's such a not crazy is the wrong word, it's just such an inappropriate reaction to have, to express your perspective of someone else's experience. And I think it does require a level of emotional intelligence, even though we would hope that it's basic. It does require a level of emotional intelligence because of let's be real, my demographic, straight white men, have been taught. I mean, we're taught that in history, we're taught that in media, we're taught that in modern stories, and we're even taught that, and I've had some conversations with people about certain CEOs or certain people in tech or VCs. They say, I don't understand why they keep doing that. Well, because they're rewarded by getting what they want, or things happening the way they want. And so I think that's a really incredible point. It's just, you don't need me to validate it, but I think people should just listen. And then it's hard not to think about what's happening in the world right now. And it's been like living in me. I've had less sleep in the last week, and I'm not someone who's directly impacted by most of what's happening, and I don't live with the same fears and reality of what's happening, but I have lost so much sleep because I'm nauseous over this unbelievably massive breakdown. And it's not new. It just happens to be very public and very intense right now.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. First of all these dots connect, right? I think in the tech industry over the weekend, we saw so many people going nuts on Twitter about Elon Musk, but we saw literally nothing. I can count on one hand and still have fingers left over for how many VCs I was following who actually said anything about what they were saying, positive or negative, which is just incredible to me. And that is exactly why people are out on the streets. They're so frustrated because we know that we have a criminal justice problem. We know that these economic disparities run deep, and it's not about Black people not working hard. Black people are the hardest working people on this planet, and it's not about us not knowing how to connect the dots. It's because of the systems that conspire, that have been designed to profit off of the backs of Black people, while not investing in those communities, while not benefiting those communities and those families. We know that there are incredible health disparities in our communities. We know all the stuff. We talk about it every night on the news. In the weeks and the months leading up to all of this unrest, we talked every day on the news about how Black communities were not only suffering more because of COVID, but they were also disproportionately the essential workers who were being forced essentially to go out on the front lines and risk their lives, knowing that they didn't have the health infrastructure in their own communities to support them when and if they got sick, knowing when they go to the doctor's office, their doctor isn't going to believe their symptoms and they're going to be sent home. So, when we think about the tech community, we've had all these folks who are crazy about Elon Musk, but have nothing to say about this issue. And this issue is very much connected to wealth building in our communities. When you have one founder that does well and gets the support and gets an exit, that founder can go back and fund all of those other founders who can then do the same thing for other folks in their pipeline, in their circle. And we don't have that in underrepresented communities and Black communities in particular, precisely because nobody's funding us, precisely because we know the stats. We've been talking about it at every conference. We're constantly putting out a new Forbes article, and yet every year over year, we see the exact same kind of stagnant pace.
Yeah.
So that same frustration that you're seeing out on the streets, it starts, this is a part of it. Our community is very much a part of it. And that is why I work with organizations with Vinette. That is why, I could be working full time on my company, but it's super important to me to make that space and make that time to work on these equity issues. Because if we don't, if we keep saying, well, I'll come back and I'll help after I get that exit, you're not going to get that exit and no progress is going to be made. And so it's really important for me to kind of connect those dots in my life.
Yeah, it's obvious and you can hear it, and even through the video and audio, you can feel it. And I think that it's no surprise what's happening in the world based on the lack of action. And I think that's
right.
been one of the big comments. It's in many ways words are cheap, and there's an Emerson quote that I love that I keep thinking about, which is, "Your actions are so loud I can't hear your words." And
it's beautiful.
That's it. Doesn't matter what you say if I can't see you doing something.
That's right.
And I think that there are large communities of people that are running out of bandwidth and patience. And if we're being honest, and this is just as an observer, like energy to put up with no change. I mean, when I talk to Black men and when I look at what I'm seeing on social, it's of sheer exhaustion, and they are emotionally beaten.
Yeah.
To the point of we're getting to the end of the thread.
Yeah.
And it's a terrifying thing to witness, because that's a place that I wish no human gets taken to.
Yeah.
And so it's, again, I think that the energy in what we're seeing is, for me, not, while it's incredibly sad and it's painful, it's not a surprising outcome given what's happened.
Right.
And where we are.
It's not. But I do want to just say that I'm really proud of all these people, kind of folks in my ecosystem, folks in my family, friends. When I watch these news, the news shows, and they're talking to these young people, and they're so articulate, and they're so passionate, and they're so determined, and they get it, right? Like these kids are out here, they understand how these dots connect, even when everyone about them, their friends on social media, their boss, their coworkers, may not approve of what they're doing, may not approve of them standing up for their very basic human rights.
Yeah.
They get it, and they know deeply that that they are justified in asking that they be seen as fully human. That is so beautiful to me, and I'm so proud of them.
I think we should just leave it right there. I don't need to muddle this up with my words. I was thinking about this conversation before we logged on. I was even thinking about, how do I promote a conversation about founders and startups when my mind is in a completely different world, And so I didn't have an expectation of taking the conversation here, but I think that there should be very few conversations that are had today that don't in somehow touch or encompass what we're experiencing and what needs to happen. And so I really appreciate you going there with me, and letting us have that conversation, and sharing the way you did, and talking about your companies and the things that you're just trying to do in the world.
Yeah.
So Dawn, I really appreciate I appreciate you for a lot of reasons, but I appreciate you for being on the show and for coming. Where should people check in if they want to follow your work, if they want to check in on what's cooking? Um,
Sure.
where should they look?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Especially given everything that's going on in the world. For the equity piece, please do check us out at Vinette Project. We're at Vinette Project on IG, on Facebook, and you can find us by searching the Vinette Project on LinkedIn. And then www.thevinetteproject or vinetteproject.com. That's a great resource for folks who are looking for resources. We're putting stuff out there and really trying to contribute to the space. And a big thank you, if she's watching, to Vanessa and the rest of the Vinette team for taking these issues so seriously, and really looking to substantively contribute to the solution. You can contact me at my company's name is The Most. Wait for it. My handle is Dawn Does The Most on IG and where else? On Instagram and yeah, I guess that's it. And Twitter. And you can look at my products and The Most at www.themostcurls, that's CURLS.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we'll drop some of those links and handles in the appropriate places for people to find. And I'm looking forward to keeping up with your work.
Yes, I can't wait until we meet again.
Take care.
Bye.